Hey everyone, thank you for clicking on the video. If you enjoy, please make sure that you like, comment, subscribe, and share with everyone. And if you have time after, please make sure you go to nateknighttalks.com and check out the NNT community and research database. Thank you. Welcome everybody, this is Nate Night Talks. Tesla, movies, and UFO current events, and more. I probably shouldn't have put an and there. I just now caught that. Oh well, too late. Going to be talking about all of those subjects tonight. So it's going to be a fun conversation, all over the place, which in a good way, obviously within those parameters. We don't want to go too off the rails with things. But I do want to start with the opening monologue, as is par for the course. And what I want to talk about, and then we'll get to movies, current events, and more. What I want to talk about pertains to Tesla. And pertains to the UFO phenomena at large. I've been reading a book, which is right here, for those of you who will see it on the video later. This is Occult, Aether, Physics, Tesla's Ideal Flying Machine, and the Conspiracy to Conceal It. I'm only roughly 20 pages or so into this book. And this was recommended to me actually by Shiva Below, which serves this whole greater story. As we talk about in this room all the time, our reality is exactly what we make of it. For better or worse, we are a reflection of all of those thoughts. And those thoughts are usually based on conditioning in the first 10 years of our life, authoritative figures later in life, whether parents, teachers, government, whatever the case may be, or just very influential peers, people that have molded our paradigm and what we believe to be true and real about reality. That's not actual reality, that's just our reality, and our subconscious mind reinforces it every day by isolating the things that corroborate or reinforce the narrative that we've convinced ourselves to be true about all things. And so within that idea that we're constantly creating our own reality, which I do believe, which also gives us the true sovereignty and power over our own destiny and our consciousness and everything that we think and do. Within that comes the idea of, I don't want to woo it with some new agey terminology, but it is essentially the law of attraction. Everything is energy, right? Everything, we boil it down to the very core of even an atom. All things are energy, resonance, frequency. And that is the nature of all things in the universe. And because there is a resonance and frequency to everything, we attract things that are on the same frequency that we are on. So it behooves us to stay in a more positive, loving frame of mind to attract things that are on that same frequency versus repelling them. And so I have been, I'm making a point here, I swear. I've been toying around the idea in this ever ongoing, never-ending exploration of the UFO phenomena, the extraterrestrial presence of consciousness, everything therein, and all of my research, all of my psychedelic journeys, all of my firsthand experience, everything is there to serve that end, to find the truth and best understand what it is to be human and in this very experience that we are in. And along that journey, as I always say, we must be willing to be wrong. We must be willing to admit the fact that, especially given the things that we're talking about, we may very well be wrong. And there's nothing wrong with that. The only problem is when we become dogmatic about a particular belief, ideology, whatever it may be, and we double down on it to a point of willful ignorance of contrary evidence that may be posed to us. And so I'm always trying to make sure that I keep that open mind, to make sure that I am taking in all information all the time, even if it may not back what I previously thought, said, or maybe believed to be true, or maybe if it's a far less compelling story to what's actually going on than visitation by extraterrestrial beings. Now, don't get me wrong. I do 100% believe that we have been visited by intelligent life from multiple planets and most likely multiple galaxies, if not just our own. And I believe that's been taking place since the dawn of time. And I believe all religions around the world are proof of that, as well as petroglyphs, hieroglyphs, and the things that have been passed down to us in story and myth and religious texts. I think that is a very good foundation of evidence to say that this visitation has been taking place since the origin of our species, and most likely is the cause of our species, in particular the human race and this missing link, if you will, in the evolutionary chain on this planet. But whether or not that is the same as the explanation for what is currently happening right now with the UFO phenomena, or even the past 100 years, is something that I do kick around a lot in my head. I don't voice it too often in these rooms, but I have, and more in passing, with just the idea that we really don't know. And the deeper I've dove into this, the more I've learned, the less I ultimately know. And that is the theme with anything that you might be researching as it pertains to any type of alternative thinking, or with subjects that are highly stigmatized and demonized and relegated to the fringe, and riddled with counterintelligence and disinformation and lies. And so it's very hard to know what the actual truth is, because there are many forces at play that are trying to keep you from ever learning it. So one of the possibilities for this influx in UFO visitation going back to essentially the 30s, and I think probably the most popular explanation in ufology, is the idea of us splitting the atom, creating the nukes. And when we did that, there seemed to be a major increase in UFO traffic on our planet. And coincidentally, after that were things like the Roswell crash and a number of other incidents that seem to coincide greatly with this influx in UFO activity, as well as their curiosity about all of our nuclear installations, whether power plants, submarines, missiles, whatever it may be, that a lot of these events were taking place near these clandestine government operations that were dealing with nuclear capability. So that is a very plausible. It's usually the one I tend to subscribe to, and a lot of I think pretty much every ufologist, any UFO researcher, thinks the same thing. And that can be easily seen by, I guess, reading any of their books, watching any of their documentaries, or just reading most blogs in the UFO space. But there is the other option. And these two aren't mutually exclusive, mind you. And so I'm definitely not saying this, that this is real, and that the idea of ET visitation as the cause of these UFOs that we've been seeing for the past 100 years is not also happening. I believe it definitely is. But I believe it may be happening less frequently than we think. And the majority of the sightings that we have seen and are seeing are a direct result of our technology. And I've always believed this. I've always believed and typically said that I believe the majority of the UFOs we see today are most likely ours. I know that's a stance Stephen Greer takes, and a number of others, that there in fact are reverse engineered craft that are flying around. But what if it's predominantly ours? And that goes for all of them. And there's been a lot of information, a lot of research that if you really dive deep into this space, you're inevitably going to come across. I can't remember what that hacker was in the 90s who hacked into NASA and talked about seeing the giant motherships that they had, like cigar-shaped massive ships that they were showing that were a part of our fleet, and smaller tic-tac looking shapes as well. A number of different shapes and sizes that we're all aware of. I think most people are aware of the three main ones, which are the cigar shape, disc shape, and triangular or chevron shaped UFOs. But there's a lot of information out there about how you distinguish between the two of them, and obviously looking for rivet features and seams and things like that would indicate that it's our technology versus theirs, which seems to be a cast mold of a material that we can't, well, we could replicate on Earth, but it would take billions, if not trillions of dollars to do, because the materials that make them up are so scarce and rare. And this also goes with the backstory of that would be the reverse engineered, that we were reverse engineering these from things like Roswell and a number of other crashes that have taken place, but we don't need to go down that rabbit hole of information. Those of you who research this are aware of a number of them, and those of you who don't can definitely look it up. But what if it was never the Roswell crash, or the Roswell crash in particular, which is a theory I heard a long time ago, but wasn't really sure what to make of it, was that those were actually the Nazi bell, the Nazi discs that went down in Roswell, New Mexico. What if all that technology this whole time was, in fact, ours? And yes, these crashes did take place, and these recoveries did take place. And once again, I'm not saying that they're not, the extraterrestrial presence is not a very real thing and a part of it. But what if it's a very, very tiny, tiny part of it? And in fact, we have had this technology, which according to this book, Occult, Aether, Physics, that dives into Tesla's past, his work, the things that he was working on as it pertained to these electrogravitic anti-gravity type of propulsion systems in vehicles. And the story about Tesla, which some of you may know a little bit about, is a very sad one and really kind of highlights the corrupt corporate power structure that exists in the world. This, if you want to call them the Illuminati or the secret societies, if you will, the very, very small elite that control pretty much all the world's resources, whether that's through banking, through insurance, agriculture, power, whether it's nuclear, gas, et cetera, fossil fuels. They've controlled all this and had monopoly on it for hundreds of years, as well as funding both sides of every war since then. And Tesla was very unfortunate in the people that he was reaching out to for funding. One of them being the Morgans from J.P. Morgan, and who was also a principal owner in G&E and the other power monopolies that were ultimately fueling the country and other parts of the world. And so his technology that he was creating, which was absolutely revolutionary. I think he had over 1,000 patents and over 1,000 others that he never actually got filed for a patent with. As reading this book, you realize that not only was he completely suppressed and silenced by the people who ultimately controlled the power, more in particular, energy, because of everything that he was inventing, essentially the 0-point energy, the ability to, power the world and create crafts that, could take us basically anywhere we wanted, that would cost less than an automobile and never need to be, recharged or maintained barely at all. These things threatened an entire industrial revolution and, frankly, the energy revolution that had been taking place. And so he was seen as a threat, and his work, unfortunately, was stalled for, I guess, a more generous and kind way of saying it. But what was revealed in this book, which was something I wasn't aware of, I'm a big fan of Tesla, doing a deep dive into his biographies or the information that has not been suppressed, the hundreds of boxes of his files that were not stolen out from under his still cooling corpse when he was found and locked away and classified and never seen again. I didn't do too much more research other than just knowing that this was most likely a big part, that we and this is something Greer, talks about all the time, that we possess this technology for essentially infinite clean energy, for over 100 years. And same thing with kind of electrogravitics and the idea of these type of propulsion systems that we see present on the UFOs. But it talked about something that I thought was interesting, which was when he was not able, because obviously those people like the Morgans and the Rockefellers, et cetera, owned the government, as do, the Rothschilds and others around the world, that he was not able to essentially get the contracts that he wanted to be able to put these type of things, especially certain flying machines, into production. And so, being obviously broke and stressed out, he ended up selling one of these patents in particular that had to do with that, and these flying machines, to none other than Wernher von Braun. And which is a very interesting tie-in for those of you who've done a lot of research into this, especially into Greer's work and everything that he talks about as far as the proof for this false flag narrative that he believes is strongly believes is upon us with the UFO disclosure. But that he basically sold it to the Germans, and they were creating or working with this technology during World War II. And that's where we hear things, obviously, that the Germans had flying saucers. They were working on, also from Die Glück, essentially time travel and a number of other things they were into. They were very much into the occult, and all of this is validated and can easily be researched, and it's a really wild and kind of crazy story. But after that was Project Paperclip, for those of you who also are familiar with this stuff. It's a very interesting tie-in of how all of this comes together, is that he sold it to the Germans, Werner von Braun. They were working on this stuff, making these craft in Germany. And then after the war was over, we obviously took, a minimum of a couple thousand of Hitler's top scientists, engineers, propagandists, propulsion experts, anybody who was in the scientific community completely was free of the Nuremberg trials, didn't have to account for any of the atrocities that they committed, and had their whole entire histories wiped, given a clean slate, and put to work in our intelligence agencies at places like NASA and other, big corporations. And that this is the explanation that he gives in this is this idea that it's the very idea of UFOs was created by the government. That this was their counterintelligence operation to essentially, or not by the government, by that shadow government, if you will, by those ruling elite, must distinguish between the actual elected government and these particular people because they are different. That this whole idea of the UFO phenomena was created to suppress the information or the technology that they had actually created and that they had inevitably mastered. And that most of these sightings, that everything that you have been seeing today, that we have seen and have seen for the past 80 years or so, has been us in pretty much all of its forms. And it's very interesting. I don't want to spend too much time in it right now because I'm literally only 20 pages into the book. But all of that was dropped essentially in the opening chapter. But it's a very interesting tie-in with all the other bits and pieces of information that are scattered around this subject that people who do deep dives inevitably run across. And the idea of the Roswell crash actually being the Nazis' saucers that they had created, and this technology ultimately being ours, that it was invented. The more you read about Tesla's technology and the things that he was doing and how really fucked up his story actually is, that we have really no idea how much he actually did achieve. And based on a lot of the quotes that it's saying in there from the letters that this guy has tracked down and all the research he's done into it, it seems that he did crack it, that he did make all this stuff and he had it working. And that was essentially, I think he died a day before he was about to go brief the president on something. That in addition to the whole Tesla angle with this, and that this technology really being created 100 years ago and being perfected ever since in a very clandestine way, and the UFO idea as merely the cover to suppress that technology. Because once again, if people had it, then the power structures who are in place, who control our lives, wouldn't have power anymore. It would completely dethrone them, and in every possible way. And he gives all the interesting examples of you could live wherever you wanted. You wouldn't need roads anymore. You wouldn't need this infrastructure. You wouldn't need power. Like you could take your little flying vehicle that costs less than an automobile to make and requires, no maintenance, and you can, live in a mountaintop somewhere like that. It would open everything up to pure, freedom and clean energy and ultimately, food and everything that goes along with that for the entire world. And this is the big thing that, Greer, to his credit, talks about all the time as it pertains to what's actually taking place and who controls the power structures. I don't know how much this particular author, I'm trying to get him on. Rest assured, we will have him for an interview. I don't know how familiar he is with Greer's work. I'm sure he probably has to be, or how much of his work maybe that Greer, has pulled from. I'd be very interested to find that out. But you look at that, you look at everything that happened with Tesla, and then you look at actually one of the declassified documents that Data has tracked down, which actually I did put. I on the Nate Night Talks website publicly. So if you go to natenighttalks.com, you don't need to join the community for this. You can just go to the website and you can look at the declassified document section. And it's, I'm trying to actually pull it up now. You can go down and you'll see the particular 800-page document that I am referring to that basically talks about the energy suppression, the tactics and everything that have taken place in a very terrifying manner for the past, 100 years. And many people are aware of these things, of these particular scientists and inventors who, came up with a car that ran on water and, were poisoned and ran out of a diner saying, I've been poisoned, and then dropped dead, right there on the spot. How many of these people have had their lives taken, as well as how many others have just had their lives ruined or never got to, had these processes delayed so long that they never actually got to see their invention ever come to light. And it basically breaks down and gives an insane amount of information on all of these cases and how many of these particular patents have existed that have been suppressed or hidden away or whatever the case may be. There are so many, and it really adds a lot of credit to the Nikola Tesla story and what he actually did create. And I believe he did. I believe he was successful in these things. I know a lot of people in here probably do believe the same thing as well. To what level, I'm sure we might not all agree upon or don't really have an idea. But based on what I'm reading so far from this guy, it seems that he did. And this is what's been happening. And it didn't end with Tesla. They did all of these bully tactics to him, inevitably, costing him his life. And none of these things ever seeing the light of day and being squirreled away by the government and those who pull the strings of the government. And this has been ongoing with every inventor since then who deals with clean energy or infinite propulsion, like anything that basically would limit their stranglehold that they have on the population for charging money for things that we could harness freely from the very air around us. So it's very interesting. It is worth more exploration for all of us, including myself. And once again, these aren't necessarily new ideas to me, and I'm sure to a lot of you. I'm sure you've heard these things scattered throughout your research into this, or maybe you are hearing this for the first time, in which case you in particular really need to do some deep diving into this and actually go into natenighttalks.com right now and starting with that energy invention suppression cases document would be a very fascinating place for you to start to have a better grasp on the embargo that has taken place on essentially freedom, creativity, and ultimately, clean energy and, space travel and everything for all. It's not new, but looking at it from this light and given everything now that we've talked about in these rooms and everything that's taking place within the government disclosure right now, and the fact that Lou and the government's company line right now, they have doubled down, they have tripled down, they cannot hammer the point any clearer that these are not our technologies, when in fact it looks like they are. And we already know this. I think people who research this do believe that we reverse engineered these craft a long time ago from like the Roswell crash. But what if it was more than that? What if it was we already created these things beforehand? That it wasn't something we necessarily acquired. Or maybe, we did as well. I believe both things happened, but that this has been something that we created from scratch. It's not like we had to figure it out. Like Tesla cracked the code. And since then, we have been building these things in a very clandestine way, almost in this, what they would call the breakaway, society kind of model. And now they're everywhere. They're showing up so much more. The government, for the first time ever, is admitting that they're real, and they're doing, they have intelligence reports on it. They have, the UAP task force. They're devoting resources to this. It's all over the news. This is what everyone's been talking about for the past 7 months, and really in the UFO community the past 3.5 years, as those the Tic Tac, Gimbal, and Go Fast videos were released. But the interesting thing is, which is why I'm always harping on, pay attention to the narrative. We give you the backstory in here. We give you the past 100 years of UFO history in this country so that you can better understand the narrative that's being fed to you. Because if you don't understand the government's involvement with this stuff, if you don't understand what they do actually know, and how deep this actually goes, then you're going to be likely to fall victim to the narrative that they're trying to feed you, that they're just as surprised as you are that these things are here, and why did we have mechanisms in place for our soldiers and pilots to report these things? Like, you didn't have in place because of things like the Robertson panel, which you initiated, so that people couldn't report these things, so that the subject was so stigmatized and filled with disinformation and counterintelligence that no respectable pilot, scientist, politician would ever touch it with a 10-foot pole for risk of career suicide or perhaps actual suicide, suiciding. And so it's important to know this, because you have to know what they're telling you and why they're telling it to you. It's a very crafted, particular narrative. And things like this add a little bit more credence, I guess. It seems to be backed up, I guess I should say, a little bit more by the fact that they really are doubling down on this idea that it's not our technology. They're willing to say that it is a foreign adversary before they're willing to say that it's ours. And that is absolutely crazy. That is so uncharacteristic of the United States government. And I think we all know that. Anybody who pays attention knows the chest pounding that takes place within our military and the military industrial complex to deny that these things, no matter what, are not ours, but could be a foreign adversary that has leapfrogged us technologically, like thousands of years, or that it's an extraterrestrial being, that those are the two main explanations they're giving. That is crazy. Like that, there's something really wrong with that. And that's why you must pay attention to these things. And why it would make even more sense that if there is, validity to the author, William Line, of the Occult Ether physics, that these were all invented, that they were invented in Germany, which we all know. They were the first people to be working on this, and perfected here in the United States and Russia and other places who obviously we were all trying to take their top researchers and people that they had. But this technology existed then. It was created. The code was cracked by Tesla. And since then, it's been being produced and perfected on massive scales, from even things like, not just little saucers or discs or chevron shapes, but actual gigantic motherships, like very, very big versions of these craft. And we had that gentleman, Tony, I don't know if he's here right now, in today, but he's shared his story the past couple of nights, of the mothership that he saw in South Africa, which is a freaking incredible story. But it's interesting, and I think it's worth more of a deep dive into this as being, and it's not, once again, far off from what Greer has been saying, is that they're ours, but he does say the same thing. It's a mix of us and them, which we all agree upon. But it seems that, I think, with the major increase in UFO sightings that's taking place right now, this major influx, that it seems like it would be us more than anything, because there's no such thing as an accident. The timing of this, like everything the government's been laying out, admitting this for the first time ever, dumping resources into this, creating task force, et cetera, that it seems too much of a coincidence that things are really on the rise right now as far as UFO sightings. But that could also be the consciousness component that I mentioned earlier, of just more people being aware now, accepting this into their reality and their paradigm to be real, and therefore now they are able to see them, where before their subconscious just blocked them out because it was told that this was absolute tinfoil hat wearing nonsense and that we are the center of the universe and there's no intelligent life here. So that was it. I think it's worthy for more exploration, and that is the point of everything in these rooms, is to have meaningful dialogue and discourse about people's opinions on this subject. People who do the research, because everyone's going to have different opinions. We're going to agree on the majority of it, I'm sure, but to hear all these different opinions and really listen to them, take them seriously. You don't have to agree with it, but hear it out, because if you don't, then we're never going to grow. We're never going to get to the bottom of a subject that is so stigmatized and filled with disinformation and lies that it's not going to happen outside of the community of all of us getting together, doing our own independent research with discernment and intellectual honesty, and then sharing that with each other and having real problem-solving conversations, trying to think about what the likely scenarios are, what the likely explanations for these things are. And so I thought this was a good one to bring up, because I definitely think there's a lot of weight to it. And for people who think that the idea of intelligent life is a stretch, this definitely would not be a stretch to think that. And we already know conspiracies are very real, and that the government or these powerful elite have done horrendous things in the name of maintaining their power and secrecy. And so, taking out one of the best inventors and minds the world has ever known, and taking his findings and squirreling them away for their own gain, that doesn't seem really too hard of a pill to swallow. Not to me, anyway. Oh, hey, you made it all the way to the end. Me too. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please make sure that you like, subscribe, comment, share with all of your friends across every social media platform. And then if you have time, go to NateNightTalks.com and join the NNT community and research database if you have time and the resources and want to support what I'm doing here.